What's up, everybody? We're going to get back into the book, starting at page 25. And the book is My Face is Black is True, Callie House and the Struggle for Ex-Slave Reparations by Mary Frances Berry. This is the association that they put together to acquire reparations. This is history, guys. So, these constitutions were apparently so highly regarded that even when Reconstruction was overthrown by the white supremacists, the basic provisions of the constitutions were maintained. The whites overthrew Reconstructions to regain power. They had no problem with the advanced structures of the government the Constitution established. Reconstruction unraveled all over the South as chaotically as it began. In House's community, as elsewhere, whites used personal intimidation, threats and dismissal from employment, manipulation of ballots, and Klan violence to force blacks out of political arena, while the national government acquiesced. C.C. Henderson, an early historian of Murfreesboro, Tennessee, wrote that when former masters and former slaves having the same surname sought the same office, election officials counted all of the votes cast for the freedmen in favor of the election of the former master. In 1869, Reconstruction ended in Tennessee, and with it, an almost complete exclusion of African American men from politics. A few continued to vote and run for office, and a few received Republican patronage appointments. However, the poll tax, biased elections officials, intimidation, and violence kept most African Americans from the polls. According to Rutherford County historian Carlton Sims, the better class of white people took over the government. In the 1870s, Callie's family, like the rest of the country's still enlarged, mostly disenfranchised black population, engaged in farming as tenants or sharecroppers, or employment as domestics or laborers. However, there were a few carpenters, blacksmiths, ministers, teachers, railroad engineers, shoemakers, boat makers, and 2 physicians. blacks had been able to experience political organizing and office holding. Some had even exercised real power for a time. African American in House's community and elsewhere in the South began to consider other routes for political action. Once Reconstruction ended and black voters were largely driven from the electoral politics. With African Americans no longer a factor, white voters divided sharply along class lines. Interesting. In the 1880s, depressed economic conditions for poor farmers led them to join radical agrarian organizations. The whites-only Southern Farmers Alliance was joined by a Colored Farmers National Alliance and Cooperation Union in 1886. Radical leaders such as Tom Watson in Georgia began preaching solidarity for poor black and white farmers. In 1892, the Populist Party tried to protect African Americans in the exercise of the franchise to ensure equal application of voting procedures and to gain the black vote. The Democrats retaliated first by trying and failing to make an alliance with the Populists, and then by forcing African Americans who worked for them to vote Democrat. The Democrats also resorted to riots and murder to maintain political office or power. Soon, however, Democrats began to complain that even when they controlled black voters, they often had to use intimidation or threats of violence. The populists feared that they would not always be able to control African Americans if they were permitted to behave as allies and not subordinates. And they also feared Democratic control of black voters in efforts to disenfranchise poor whites. Poor whites, the planter class, and industrialists joined together in forcing African Americans out of the political arena in the 1890s. State after state formally disenfranchised African Americans by the discriminatory use of reading and understanding clauses, by writing rigid educational and property tests for voting into their constitutions, and by enacting grandfather clauses that enfranchise only those whose fathers and grandfathers had been qualified to vote. On January 1st, 1867, so the only the people who could vote is if their grandfathers or fathers had been qualified to vote on January 1st, 1867, which automatically excluded blacks, most of whom had still been slaves on that date. Callie grew to adolescence during Reconstruction and the reaction that followed it. In 1880, she lived in Rutherford County with her widowed mother, Ann Guy, in the household of her sister Sarah and Sarah's husband, Charles House, a laborer and minister. Callie attended school, and her mother, who could not read or write, took in washing. In 1880, the black population of the county grew from 16,493 still about 50% of the population. In 1881, Tennessee had the distinction of passing the first law in the South that officially mandated the segregation that already existed in fact. In 1883, at age 18, Callie left her sister's household, marrying William House, a laborer who may have been related to her brother-in-law, Charles. Callie and William House had 6 children, five of whom three was girls and two was boys, survived. Thomas, the eldest, was born in 1885, and Annie, the youngest, in 1893. Callie House's mother apparently died sometime before the 1900 census was taken. She no longer lived in the household of any of the relatives, and she does not appear in the census anywhere thereafter. In the years after Reconstruction, as African Americans considered alternative routes to empowerment, people in House's neighborhood joined in talking about immigration to the North or to Africa. So this talk was going on. The discussion was not new. One segment of white opinion in the early republic believed that democracy and Christianity required the deportation of blacks to Africa. The philosophy espoused by Thomas Jefferson and others was the basis of the founding of the American Colonization Society in December 1816. So the American Colonization Society was founded from Thomas Jefferson wanting to send black people back to Africa. In December 1816, January 1817, the the establishment of Liberia on the west coast of Africa in 1822. By the beginning of the Civil War, the American Colonization Society had removed about 11,000 African Americans to Liberia. Although some historians insist that there was little real interest in immigration before the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, the thousands of letters in the files of the ACS suggest another story. Slaves and free blacks continually wrote to the society after 1817, expressing their desire to immigrate to Liberia to escape discrimination, to establish a Christian outpost in Africa, to obtain the same kinds of opportunities in a new land as European immigrants had found in the United States, and to aid in crushing the African slave trade. Peter Butler, a semi-literate free black from Petersburg, Virginia, expressed the typical view when he wrote in 1848, "I wish to go to Liberia, so as I may teach sinners the way of salvation, and also educate my children and enjoy the right of a man. I have tried a great many places in these United States, and I find that none of them is the home for the colored man. And so I am looking in my mind for a home, and I find that Liberia is the only place of enjoyment for the colored man." Some African American immigrationists saw efforts towards colonization in Africa of free Negroes and subsidization of American Colonization Society by Congress as claims for redress. So they thought that was going to be like reparations. They constantly demanded that the U.S. government pay blacks for their sufferings and unrequited toil while in bondage. At the Immigration Convention of 1854, blacks insisted nothing less than a national indemnity indelibly fixed by virtue of our own sovereign potency will satisfy us as a redress of our grievances for the unparalleled wrongs, undistinguished impositions, and unmitigated oppression which we have suffered at the hands of this American people. For our own part, we spurn to treat for liberty on any other terms or conditions. The advent of the Civil War, so that was even before the Civil War. The advent of the Civil War and the hope that it would bring complete liberation led to a decrease in interest in immigration. However, after the Civil War in 1865, the ACS renewed its work. By 1868, the ACS had sent 2,232 blacks to Liberia from all over the South, including Nashville and the surrounding areas in Middle Tennessee. This was more than twice the annual average for the entire period from 1820 to 1861. In addition to educated blacks who wanted to become missionaries, poor African Americans still seeking land were attracted. Henry Adams, a former slave in Georgia and Louisiana, became one of the mass leaders for 3 years. He served in the Union Army, where he learned to read, write, and count. Faced with the mistreatment black experienced in service, he and a few others began to organize. Adams traveled throughout the South, splitting rails, working on organizing and observing the poor conditions of blacks everywhere. The violence attending the post-Reconstruction regaining of power by whites in Louisiana caused him and others to petition President Ulysses S. Grant to send blacks to Liberia. In 1877, they sent a similar petition to Rutherford B. Hayes. They noted that 12 years after the Civil War, African Americans in some ways were in a worse condition than they were before their disenfranchisement. Than they were before those constitutional guarantees were extended. They cited their disenfranchisement, violence, landlessness, and inability to control their lives and protect their families. They had no hope that their prospects would improve. African American political participation started in 1867. During Reconstruction in the Deep South, reduced the interest in immigration, but the brutal white reaction against Reconstruction stimulated it again. Blacks participated in electoral politics when they could, but then organized and kept the immigrationist idea before them. Information spread through the local political councils, benevolent associations, schools, black newspapers, and ACS African repositories, which was read aloud at church or local political meetings. Heightened interest in African immigration in Tennessee and elsewhere came in 1879 and 1880. At the same time, the exodus to Kansas movement started by the illiterate Benjamin Pap Singleton, a former Tennessee slave who had escaped to Canada before the Civil War, gathered momentum. Returning to Middle Tennessee after the war, Singleton urged blacks to abandon politics because they were being swindled. As a result of the emphasis on politics during Reconstruction, Singleton contended whites had the lands and the sense, and the blacks had nothing but their freedom. In order to make this freedom real, Singleton organized a land company in 1869 after prices in Tennessee proved too high. In 1871, he began urging African Americans to acquire public lands in Kansas. Between 1873 and 1879, he took several groups of Tennessee and Kentucky blacks there. Singleton and his cohorts wanted to create an independent, separate African American enclave in Kansas. Southern blacks showed a feverish interest in immigration between 1876 and 1881. Thousands of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas black moved to Kansas during this period. By 1879, they had purchased about 10,000 acres of public land. The immigrants were generally so destitute, however, that initially they had to obtain relief from Kansas whites. As their numbers increased and discrimination and segregationists arose in Kansas, Singleton began urging blacks to immigrate to Canada or Liberia. And in 1885, he formed the United Transatlantic Society to foster African colonization. Despairing that they would ever achieve full citizenship in the United States. The society argued that only in an African state with a separate national existence could blacks survive. Henry Adams worked with Singleton for a time. His petition to Rutherford B. Hayes in 1874 insisted that the exodus of our people to some other country was the only hope and preservation of our race. He supported the exodus north of immigration to Liberia as alternatives. He thought blacks needed to leave the South for some place they might have an opportunity for self-development and control over their own lives. Southern whites reacted negatively to the prospect that they might lose the use of the exploited black labor. See, they didn't want you to go nowhere. So they exploited black labor. So concerned did the government become about the exodus and the back to African immigration movement that in 1880, the U.S. Senate held an investigation into the causes of the removal of the Negroes from the southern states to the northern states, producing 3 large volumes of testimony and assessment. No matter how much discontent African Americans expressed, probably no more than 25,000 blacks actually immigrated to Kansas in 1879, 1880. Also, probably no more than 4,000 managed to reach Liberia during the whole post-Civil War period. However, immigrationism as a political solution did not die. Segregation, lynching, poverty, and disenfranchisement kept the idea alive among African Americans in the late 1880s and thereafter, despite Booker T. Washington's opposition to the idea gathered steam. Washington thought blacks should stay in the South and accommodate themselves to conditions there. However, letters to the American Colonization Society came from blacks in Nashville and almost every other sizable city and the surrounding areas inquiring about going to Liberia. In the 1890s, the AME Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, former Union soldier and Georgia legislator, was the chief supporter of the Back to Africa idea. Although Turner had no viable organization base or economic means for sending blacks to Africa, some whites supported him. In 1894, with the backing of Alabama Senator John Morgan, Turner formed the International Migration Society, and by 1896, he sent 2 boatloads of immigrants to Liberia. African American ministers were divided on the subject of immigration because they could lose congregations. Further, politicians who had combined with Democrats to maintain some power by pretending they had voting constituencies would lose their posts. Therefore, although people met in churches and in schools and made plans to leave, they often met with hostility from their leaders. Some African Americans in House's community immigrated to Kansas, and others discussed the possibility of going there or to Africa. She remained in Rutherford County raising her children after the death of her husband, William. She became a washerwoman, taking in laundry like her mother and other women in similar circumstances. Soon, a new idea for political action resurfaced in Rutherford County and other communities all over the South and Midwest where ex-slaves lived. Agents came to the community selling a pamphlet entitled Freedmen's Pension Bill, a plea for American freedom. 10,000 copies of the pamphlet at $1 each were sold in 1891, and several editions were produced thereafter. Poor African Americans bought such publications, usually jointly, and passed copies around and read them aloud to each other, since they often could not afford the purchase price, just as they had done with the newspapers and other literature in their churches and community organizations since slavery. Those who could read the pamphlets read it to the others. The idea that pensions for ex-slaves captured House's imagination. This idea of pensions for ex-slaves captured House's imagination. From reading this pamphlet, she learned that the author, Walter Vaughn, a former editor of the Omaha, Nebraska Daily Democrat, a native of Selma, Alabama, and a white Democrat, had used political contacts to have an ex-slave pension bill patterned after the idea of the very popular Union Veterans Pension introduced in the Congress. Callie and other African Americans had Union veterans in their families, and they knew pensions were available, although widows and children had difficulty obtaining them because they lacked documentation of their marriages and births. Vaughn had persuaded his Nebraska congressman, the Republican William Connell, to introduce the legislation in 1890, establishing a formula later used by the Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Association. See, the Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Association. The measure called for providing for a pension of $15 per month and a bounty of $500 for each ex-slave 70 years or older. Those under 70 will receive $300 as their bounty and $12 per month until they reach the age of 70, when it would increase to $15. Those under 60 years old would receive $100 bounty and $8 a month until they reach 60. Those less than 50 years old would receive $4 per month, and then at age 50, $8 a month. Ex-slaves and such persons as may be charged by laws of, I have to learn how to pronounce this word, consanguinity. I'm going to type that in. What's going on, Leroy? What's up, brother? I'm going to type this word in this chat that I can't understand yet, and we're going to figure it out later. And this is the last page. I'm just reading really like 10 pages a day. every time I read this. And this is something that we just need to understand. Like, if we don't understand our history, then we just keep going in circles. And we start from the ground up fighting a fight that we have to fight. But when we keep forgetting that we have to fight the fight, and then the new generations automatically they're going to be routed right towards the same fight again. They're going to be routed towards the fight again. And so what ends up happening is that we get outmaneuvered. So let's start again. Let's start from that. So basically, the people that were eligible were relatives who cared for freedmen and those who could, upon providing satisfactory proof to the Secretary of the Interior, receive the pensions. Ex-slaves under the bill included only those freed by Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, by the state constitutional amendment, or by any law, proclamation, decree, or device. The plan appeared uncomplicated, requiring only that a claimant had been enslaved. Under the law, any black person alive before 1861 was presumed to have been a slave in the South unless proof to the contrary was presented. So the thing is, too, that also takes care of the lie. And I wanted to show a couple of pictures, but I don't even know if I can get to it. But that also takes care of the lie. So that's the end that I'll read on, and that is on page 36. The thing is, though, sometimes we think that our group of people have a choice. When you commit a crime against humanity, then there's something in nature that pushes, no matter what decisions get made, those crimes have to be balanced somehow. They must be properly balanced. If those crimes are not properly balanced, then the people who are the survivors of it, even if they know nothing about what actually happened, they will understand that there's something wrong, and they will end up pushing for some sort of balance. So if this country, you're talking about the United States of America, if you think this country is going to get past doing some sort of reparation, it's just not going to happen. So the way the reparation is going to end up happening is that, either we're going to take over the whole thing because they're just going to pass, because nobody stays in power forever. And that's the bottom line is you enslaved all these people. You got all this different genetic material here, and now you have to pay for it. So you have to combine the mindset. So this is what I wanted to show. Let me see if I can find a couple pictures. I don't know if I can do it because let's see. I wanted to show some of the pictures in this book, but maybe I can't get to it. Yeah, but this is something I think that's very important that, especially this is Black history. We definitely need to know, these are our parents here. They've been fighting this reparation fight for a while. Oh. Yeah, this is it. Let me see if I can flip it. This is Vaughn. What the heck? Let's try it. Let's see. I just want to show some pictures that was in this book. And then we gonna go. So this is the white man who came and started the ex-slave pension. It won't stay that way. Shoot. Let's see if it changes anyway. Let's see. We can. So this is Vaughn. It won't. The shared screen stuff is so crazy. Anyway, I thought I was gonna be able to share it, everything, but anyway, we'll have another talk. Leroy, one of these days I'm gonna get. Oh, let me see. I wanted to see if you can come up here. It's one of the. Let's see. Hey, Leroy, see if you got time. Go ahead and click that link so we can have a little conversation for a minute. But yeah, we need to understand that real history is not optional. When these people, they're talking about critical race theory, you can't side with people against what's right. Otherwise, you're just going to keep running in circles. It's not going to be successful. And then you're going to condemn a whole nother generation to do the same crazy stuff that I don't know, that the people have already realized that doesn't work. You can't get away from a crime against humanity. This is what a lot of folks don't understand. Crimes against humanity must be cleaned up. All they would need is a good 20 years. Go ahead and clean it up. Stop bombing people's towns. Let black folks go ahead and grow. And let us go ahead and do what we got to get done so that we can go ahead and live our lives and grow our people. The people have to be able to repair themselves. There's no one little situation that would. Yeah, there's no one situation that's going to repair anybody. You know what I'm saying? We have to learn how to repair ourselves, but we have to have the ability and we have to have the time to repair ourselves. We have to have the control to repair ourselves. We can't always have to ask another group of people. We need schools. We need to invest the money here. We know what we need to do to repair ourselves. Our people knew what we needed to do to repair ourselves before slavery even ended. So we got to get out of this situation where we think we actually have a real choice. We don't have a choice for getting this reparations thing. You don't have a choice. You got to do it. You got to fight for the reparations, and they got to give it up. If they don't give those reparations up, they go down. And we see that right now. This group of people, they're looking like crazy. They don't know how to run the country no more. They don't have any integrity because they lost their integrity trying to keep our people ignorant and stupid, which made them keep their own people ignorant and stupid. And now the country has no credibility in the world, and they're weakening themselves. They're bringing all these immigrants in because they was trying to keep money away from the hands of black people, because they have a problem with us having success. And that's because they have taught racism. They should not have a problem with anybody, especially someone who grew in the same country as they did. Why should they have a problem with us having success? And this is the reason why they outsource all of the jobs. They outsource all of the issues in the industry to enemies and make them strong to come back and kill you. So anyway, guys, this is it. And we'll go ahead and do another reading for this particular book. I'll try to have the pictures a little bit more ready later the next time. All right, peace.